Please be seated. Proceedings are resumed.
Private member motion number 20 of 1718, amendment to the immigration law 2015 revision, to be moved by the elected member for East End.
Elected member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move private member motion number 20, 1718, which reads as follows. Amendment to the Immigration Law 2015 revision. Whereas the Immigration Law 2015 revision, Section 37D, and the Immigration Regulations 2017 revision, Section 14C, provides for the Chief Immigration Officer to grant a residency certificate, substantial business presence upon application to anyone, A, who owns or proposes to own either directly or indirectly a minimum of 10% of the shares in an approved category of business in the islands through which he has established or will establish a substantial business presence in the islands, or B, proves to the satisfaction of the Chief Immigration Officer that he is or will be employed in the senior management capacity of an approved category of business in the islands, and whereas there are instances of these residency certificates, substantial business presence, having been issued solely on the basis of persons being in a senior management capacity and without any investments in a business due to an anomaly, in the wording at the end of Section 37D1A of the Immigration Law 2015 revision, which should read "and" rather than "or," be it therefore resolved that the government amend the Immigration Law 2015 revision with immediate effect to have this anomaly corrected with the desired objective of ensuring no more residency certificate substantial business presence are issued to persons in senior management capacity without direct or indirect investment in approved categories of businesses in the islands.
Is there a seconder? The elected member for Newlands.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I rise to second private member's motion number 20 of 2017-2018, amendment to the immigration law.
The question is that be it therefore resolved that the government amend the immigration law 2015 revision with immediate effect to have this anomaly corrected with the desired objective of ensuring no more residency certificate, substantial business presence are issued to persons in senior management capacity without direct or indirect investments in approved categories of businesses in the islands. The motion is now open for debate. Does the honorable mover wish to speak thereto?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I note with some interest that despite the Premier proclaiming yesterday that he has been in this infernal game for some time, that there seems to be some outing of the fires today. Seems like we have decided to be kinder and gentler to each other in. I don't think most of us will get older, but won't be any soft. Mr. Speaker, personally, I do hate to have to be here today to deal with this matter, or hate to have had to bring it to this point. However, Mr. Speaker, during the afternoon break, it appears like the Premier may have had some develop some positions that may require us to take a second look at this. But despite what his position is, I believe that because I was here when this was done as well, I am of a different view than he is, but we will have to see how that works out. Mr. Speaker, the provisions in the immigration law for a substantial business presence is found in Section 37D. Mr. Speaker, the immigration law was amended to include this provision in 2011. Mr. Speaker, it was the UDP government with your good self as the minister responsible for financial services and investments. Mr. Speaker, we had just come off of a global recession. We were just emerging from it. And in the infinite wisdom of the then government, they decided to try every different avenue to attract different businesses to the country to assist us to emerge from that economic doldrums. At the time, the now Premier and I were in the opposition, and we supported the initiative to try to attract some of those businesses that that hitherto had avoided us, or that we were not attracting, and other jurisdictions were attracting. So we decided to specifically name the categories of business that we were trying to attract. And in doing so, the attempt was to offer investors incentives to do so. Part of those incentives was the ability to obtain a 25-year work permit if certain levels of investment were made in those categories. And Mr. Speaker, I'll get to those categories in a minute. Mr. Speaker, part of the motion did laid out part of those 37D. But let me read 37D1 in its entirety. 37D1. A person who is or proposes to be legally an ordinary resident in the islands for a minimum period of 90 days in each calendar year, and who A, owns or proposes to own, either directly or indirectly, a minimum of 10% of the shares in an approved category of business in the islands through which he has established or will establish a substantial business presence in the islands, or proves to the satisfaction of the Chief Immigration Officer that he is or will be employed in a senior management capacity of an approved category of business in the islands, may apply to the Chief Immigration Officer for a residency certificate, substantial business presence, but such certificate shall not confer any right to a license under the local companies control law or the Trade and Business Law 2007 revision. The key there is senior management capacity in an approved business, owns, operates, legal and ordinary resident in the islands for a minimum period of 90 days in each calendar year, and does not confer any right to a license under the local companies control law. That's the LCCL as it is locally termed. Mr. Speaker, in regulations, the corresponding secondary legislation can be found under 14C of the regulation. Mr. Speaker, and I read 14C1 of the Immigration Regulation 2018 revision reads as follows. In considering whether an applicant under Section 37D has established or will establish a substantial business presence in the islands, the Chief Immigration Officer shall take into account A, whether through the purchase or lease of commercial real estate, the business has established a physical presence in the islands, and B, whether the business in question employs or will employ a minimum of 4 full-time employees who are legally and ordinarily resident in the islands for a minimum of 9 months in any calendar year. 2, in pursuance of Section 37D, the following are approved categories of businesses. A, fund administration. B, brokerage services. C, investment and fund management services. D, investment banking. C, financial trading, including foreign exchange, securities, and derivatives. F, captive insurance or reinsurance management services. G, reinsurance underwriting. H, actuarial services. I, insurance claims management. J, family office. K, hedge fund incubation. Any business operating from within Cayman Brac, providing human resource, accounting, administrative IT, or other back office support to businesses in Cayman Brac and elsewhere, and M, any company registered as an exempt company under Section 164 of the Companies Law 2018 revision. 3, in pursuance of Section 37D1B, a person shall be deemed to be employed in a senior management capacity where the person is or will be employed by a business referred to in Regulation 14C2 A to K, and M, in any occupation which attracts an annual work permit fee of $20,925 or above, or B, employed by a business referred to in Regulation 42C2I in an occupation which attracts an annual work permit fee of $5,000 or above. That B refers to Cayman Brac and Little Cayman. Mr. Speaker, it came to my attention that earlier last year, just subsequent to the elections, that it was believed these certificates of 25 years work permit were being issued to people who were not in that category, but more importantly, only in senior managerial position. So I set out to do the investigation and try to find out what was going on. Mr. Speaker, I approached the government, but of course, I think the government said that they may have not been so busy. They were so busy that it may have slipped them. So it's unfortunate that I have had to bring it here. Mr. Speaker, in preparing to bring this here, I did an FOI asking certain questions about this category of work permits to the Immigration Department. And the questions were, how many residency certificates, substantial business presence has been issued since the implementation of Section 37D by year? Names of recipients, length of time recipients were on island prior to issuance, immigration status of the recipients at time of issuance, work permit, visitors, etc. Company recipient working for at time of issuance and position held, Section 37D1. Category of business invested in and position held. Date of investment for each recipient. Amount of investment declared upon application. That's what I do late at night. Mr. Speaker, I received the response I sent that in February and received the response in April. Mr. Speaker, after they had responded and said they couldn't because there were too many people off and that kind of stuff, and they asked for the extension, the grant. Mr. Speaker, the response included and I read, the Immigration Department has advised that the provision for the residency certificate was introduced on 5th of June 2012. And there are currently a total of 25 recipients. They were issued in the following years: 2014, 1; 2015, 4; 2016, 9; 2017, 10; 2018, 1. Along with that, Mr. Speaker, came an appendix listing all of those certificates with the names redacted. Mr. Speaker, I know you were going to ask for these copies, so I did them myself. Because, Mr. Speaker, I don't know what's wrong with the government system, but this is like those fine print on those insurance and them lawyers when they put the fine print at the bottom. You can barely see it. And I had to blow this up and stretch it out and lengthen it out and widen it out.
But do you have it?
Yes, I do, Mr. Speaker. If the sergeant, I was hoping to delay it so the sergeant could come in. I don't know. I can give you the original one, Mr. Speaker, but you're not going to see it very clearly. That's it.
Have a copy. Lay one on the table.
Can we pass this also to the Speaker, please? This is the original that I just printed off, and I had to manipulate that one to spread it out.
Put on the table, eh?
Give him the small one, please. Okay. Mr. Speaker,
Oh, my small right now.
it lists, like I said, the name of the recipient has been redacted. Citizen of, it shows where the place of origin of the recipient. Gives the file number, it gives the agent that submitted the application, the current employer, the position held, category of business invested in, length of time on island prior to issuance, status on island at time of issuance, company applicant working for at time of issuance and position held, date of investment, amount of investment declared on application form, then additional information and the date of approval. Mr. Speaker, members and yourself will note that there is much information here that brings and makes us question whether or not this provision in the law is being operated properly. And I want to hear what the Premier is saying, and maybe there is, maybe I have not got it totally right, but certainly it is, it proves there is a problem. Something is wrong with him. Because, Mr. Speaker, when we look at some of these companies and the positions held, based on our local knowledge, we know they do not fall in the categories that it was intended for. And starting at the bottom, we can see that. Sol Investment. Now, Sol Investment is no fund administrator. It is no insurance claim manager, but most of all, the law says that this certificate shall not confer any right to a license under the Local Companies Control Law 2007 revision. That is law. Now, Mr. Speaker, Sol, and a just senior chief executive officer and chief financial officer operates an LCCL. And they are applying on the basis that they work for that company. And the law says no rights are conferred upon an LCCL. That's number one. And the Attorney General, I am by no stretch of the imagination a lawyer. But certainly, I would like to think, however that was done, it is done by virtue of, should I say, error or a manipulation of this, or erroneously done, in my view. That's in my view, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are companies such as CIBC Bank, Chief Risk Officer, Director of Wealth Management. That one we find in I don't see it in here, but it probably could be claimed under fund management, investments, or what have you. Mr. Speaker, First Caribbean International Bank, Managing Director, Chairman / CEO. Mr. Speaker, what is interesting, Mr. Speaker, is that only 2 people made investments of one of 3 million and one of 1 million into those companies. The managing director of Aon Insurance Managers Cayman Limited made $1 million investment. The manager. Mr. Speaker, I'll
What today's paper?
Mr. Speaker, let me continue by saying that when we look at the length of time on Ireland prior to issuance, in the case of those that I have already called their name Saul, one was here 6 months and one was here 10 months. There are people, there are positions, issuance on here with people on work permit for 3 months, 6 months, 9 years, 7 years. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 people under a particular company who, after being here for 9 years, in the categories, rightfully within the categories that is outlined in law, who applied for their RERC legitimately, but during the wait for that RERC, somehow it was found out that this could be done. And they applied for this substantial business because of the senior management capacity. This was issued prior to the RERC being issued. The RERC was, not RERC, the residency was PR, was subsequently issued during that period. At least 2 of those individuals' job was terminated and has since left the country. And they have now applied to have this substantial business 25-year work permit rescinded and claim their PR. Mr. Speaker, and I will listen to the government that this may not be what it seems, but something is wrong with how this thing is being operated. Now, Mr. Speaker, if we look at the agents who made applications for these certificates of 25-year work permit, you will note that there is one company in particular who has made the majority of the applications. Out of that 25, 9 out of it. And that company happens to be HSM. That's the law firm across the road. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have always had respect for people until they lose it for me. And this is loss of respect, because that is the genesis of this whole problem, that HSM, and in particular two lawyers therein, Nick Joseph and Hugh Moses. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Joseph holds himself out to be the guru, the immigration guru in this country. But in addition to that, he has achieved that status, self-imposed, because he holds himself out and purports to be a lover of my country. And he grew up here, and he will make you believe that there are halos around his head, and he is holier than thou. Mr. Speaker, his partner, Hugh Moses, the same one that get OBE from Dinwiddie, or no, that was Dimwiddie, Governor Dimwiddie, for providing one office space for us to meet one weekend as legislators. I went to the second meeting the second day, and I wouldn't go back. When he started crying, I knew he was a dimwit. Mr. Speaker, he was this. Can't speak ill of a governor. You know. Mr. Speaker, these two gentlemen, let me just say, Mr. Speaker, these learned gentlemen are experienced and highly regarded members of the legal profession, or they're supposed to be. They therefore should know, and in particular, Mr. Joseph, that he is required to conform to generally accepted principles of professional ethics, which would, as far as I understand, include not acting on matters which he has a glaring conflict of interest in. Those of us, including the Premier, who were here during the raging debate over the legal practitioners bill that was presented by the last administration will remember well all the heated discussion about conflicts of interest. It is therefore indeed quite ironic that we are here today discussing this matter again. The irony being that this kind of thing demonstrates very clearly why we do in fact need an updated legal practitioners law with a proper independent regulator with clear rules as to, among many other things, what circumstances can give rise to a conflict of interest, because it would seem from what we are seeing here, as well as back when we had that painful debate, that we cannot leave it up to the profession to regulate themselves or to define for their purposes whether or not they have a conflict of interest in a matter. This Mr. Joseph has been training the government staff on immigration law in the past. He has been advising on provisions in the immigration law. And this is the man who will take against him. This is the man who, as I understand it, goes over to that immigration department and intimidates everybody and gets what he wants. Or tries to win out. When you are using a system for your own gain, and then which represents a conflict, and you continue to do it, you need not tell me that you are holier than thou. But as a legislator, the responsibility I have to my people is to expose you. Speak the truth. And that is who they are. In the meantime, we have them engaged about collecting money for the hospital. And then, that's like how we go. The other one there, Chris Johnson, him too. Conflict to the Maya. Every one of them, Hugh Moses, he sit on every board. And you know, Mr. Speaker, when we put our little Caymanian who got one little business on planning board or something, first thing we claim in using it for his own business. I got to tell this house and this country what I told Joe Imperato. He say my interest in not allowing him to do that dock in East End was because I was protecting the quarries in East End. You doggone right I was. I didn't want him to dig that up and then they would lose their little quarry business. Who am I to protect but the people of East End? But we relegate our people to conflict of interest because we put them on boards here and there, and they may. The one thing I can say about them is that those people is that they will declare their interest and leave the room. At least from a formality perspective, they have done what they had to do. People like Hugh Moses and Nick Joseph, they all use the positions they have and they get in furtherance of themselves. Then they are invited to the government. How do we pay for it? From India. Mr. Speaker, it bothers me that we can see in the papers Nick Joseph advertising that he's the guru and he having meetings or he having seminars or he's having speaking at Chamber of Commerce investment thing just the other day. And some friend of mine was there and told me how he related how a client needed to show that he had an income for 1 year for the status. You know, you're only required to show income for 1 year, the last year, to qualify. And Smarter grew. Pulled $1 out of his pocket and gave it to the client. He said, that's a 100% increase in 1 year. And he was right. And made an application, and he got status. But once he had that in his pocket, his income had increased 100% for the last year. Because he wasn't working. And to think this man who purports to love this country, who claims he went to school with all of us and our children, and his family are securely rooted in this country way back when. They have nothing to do with my country. My suggestion to the government is do not give him no more work on consultancy. Not the elected arm. The elected arm don't hire him. I'm just getting his way. Mr. Speaker, this bothers me that this could be so blatant to think that you understand, Mr. Speaker, this started with CIBC. And now, Mr. Speaker, I am saying to the government, the one that got elected somehow on the 24th of May last year. Well, see how I got elected? We were properly, democratically elected and came in here, but somehow we did it. If it were left to me, I only wouldn't come. Some of us by the skin of our teeth, which may include me, but some of us running to weak areas too. Some of us running to weak areas to secure our election too. Coward man keeps sound bones and beg for existence. Beg for continuity. I mean you, Mr. Speaker. No, you're not in that category. No. Mr. Speaker.
71%. 71%.
Oh, yeah. I used to have that too, but you know how that goes. Mr. Speaker, you know there was a time when yourself, the one from the West in Cayman back, and myself were the three top on, and then Kurt as well, the four of us. So don't talk no foolishness. Don't come with that. Oh, there is always an ebb and a flow. Make sure you catch the ebb, or you gotta go out in the flow. You get dragged out. Mr. Speaker, I know yesterday the good gentleman from Prospect spoke quite passionately about work, WORC, about its objective and what we hope to achieve and the like. Mr. Speaker, I said to him quietly somewhere that this behavior like this is one of the greatest threats to advancement of Caymanians. Forget about being bottom feeders. Forget about us, our vocational training, our vocational choices in this country. This is where the middle class comes from. We need to ensure many of us get into these positions. Mr. Speaker, I know there are many disciplines. There are disciplines. I'm not saying many. I ain't going to say that about Caymanians. There are disciplines that we are yet to capture. I understand that. But time moves on. And I can assure anyone in this world, in this country, that Caymanians are capable of being educated in those disciplines. I read somewhere a report many years ago that it was a report looking at the different disciplines like hedge funds and the countries where you have the smartest people on hedge funds and structures, legal structures and stuff. The Cayman Islands was in the top 10. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know where I come from. People like the twinkle eye guy and all them things and the tall man, you know. We know who that. We can go no further. Those are people who have been here a long time and allow us that category. But there are Caymanians in those categories too. When people like Nick Joseph tries to manipulate the system and increase the thickness of that glass ceiling, he is doing the country that he purports to love and grew up in a disservice. For a fist, you remember the Clint Eastwood movie? Fistful of dollars. That's all he's getting. Mr. Speaker, that should bother us all. I am saying to the government that I believe they have, and the Attorney General can determine this, they have a clear opportunity here to review these things and see which one qualifies within the category of businesses that we listed in the regulation. And those who are not, we revoke them. I mean, we are constantly, I see where the government is bringing changes to the fuel and thing now in the off-reg and stuff. Mr. Speaker, we are constantly arguing about people like Saul killing our people. And we go on trying to 5-year work permit to stay here, not only to kill us, but to bury us too. Are we giving them the right to do as they please? Mr. Speaker, that bothers me. It really does, sir. And it should reach the soul of every member of this honorable house. And let's say I'm wrong, and the Premier will get up and decide whether I'm wrong. And you know what? When he can claim he has been a part of this infernal profession for a long time, I claim it too. Because I know one day it's roses and the next day it's fire and brimstone. Tell him bring in fire and brimstone. If you think I can't throw it back. But he's not going to do that. He knows better. Mr. Speaker, I submit to you, Mr. Speaker, and to my colleagues, again, that this type of thing is the greatest threat to the advancement of our people. Those that entrusted us with a requirement to look out for them. Mr. Speaker, I don't know whether or not I made sufficient headways in making the government appreciate or understand what I was trying to get after, but I know the Premier is going to respond, so I was trying to hold up for him, but I don't know if I can do that any longer, despite him telling me that I can't, that he knew it was going to be a long debate. But, Mr. Speaker, as I have said, these people, every one of us blame our other people. Why are we so selfish? Why are we so selfish and cruel to our very own? And the others amongst us are taking us down one peg at a time, one by one. That's what we do. That's what we allow. We don't do it as much as we allow it. Whether it's our families or friends. I don't understand why we don't understand the concept of the hole being in my end of the boat. But you will get wet soon. I don't understand why we don't understand that. I don't. Mr. Speaker, I leave it up to the members to make a decision on whether or not we do something about this matter. I thank you and I thank members for their attention.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The member for Morgantown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I'd like to thank the member from Eastern for taking this issue up. Just to give members of this Honorable House the genesis of this issue, it came about last year when a very qualified young Caymanian had applied for a job at CIBC Bank. And then found out basically that she didn't get the job and was unsuccessful and wanted to know why. And when we went digging, Mr. Speaker, and this is where the EIU comes in as an intelligent unit, we found out that the person who got the job when they originally was in the position had a different category of work permit. And the minute that they find out that this law was available, changed their job title to move up into the category that qualifies, and then was given this position. As you can see from the document that the member laid, that person was pretty much 1 year in, and not a senior management position or anything like that. Mr. Speaker, I think at the end of the day, we can all agree that an error does not become a mistake until we fail to correct it. And this law, we don't want anyone to believe that it is a bad law, because at the end of the day, of the 25 that we looked at, and you look at the list of the companies that are there, many of them achieved the objective that we wanted it to do in terms of attracting some of the business. So we don't want the public to believe that there are 25-year work permits that were issued that were incorrect, because some of them genuinely fulfill the category. But as usual, when you do have unscrupulous lawyers who are just chasing the dollars, these are the kind of things that they do. They do find loopholes for their client. That's what they... Yep. The thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, this individual that brought this to our attention was a former government scholarship recipient. Qualified, many years back, she had got her qualifications, and served as an example of previous governments investing in education, investing in our young people, for them to come back and take their rightful positions in Cayman. And after years of experience and qualifications and everything, was basically denied by, again, this glass ceiling. The thing about it is, Mr. Speaker, when people abuse this process, they also jump the line for legitimate people who have been here for years, worked among us, lived amongst us, play by the rules, and then someone just jump in and just take a spot that they basically didn't earn. And these kind of behavior disrupt the social harmony. And the thing about it is the fact that we have 9 of the applicants being done by one law firm, Mr. Speaker. And I'm going to tell you, that's a law firm, in my opinion, ain't no good either. They specialize in foreclosing on people's homes. That's what they basically make their money from. Yes, that's right. Just last week, they were one of them, and I can tell you, I have had my own dealings with them, and I can tell you they're not good people. Seriously, they're not good people. You know what I mean? And the thing about it is, some of them, I don't know if it's a personal pleasure, some kind of perversion that they get from it, but it is almost something that is really and truly something that needs to be dealt with. So you know what? For the 19 of us that sit inside this honorable chamber, we have been given an awesome responsibility and also an awesome privilege to say what we want to say inside here and don't have to worry about anybody suing any of us. So to my constituent that they wrote all those nasty letters to evict him, I want you to know for the record, at least we came up inside here and told everybody what we really think of them and the people that they employ. Now, I understand that some people have to do what they need to do to make a living, but some people go overboard. And I understand that we have also employed these people to go chase money that is owed by the hospital. And I'm going to beg the government to reconsider looking at them for the simple fact. The people that they're chasing are probably people who are sick or probably still sick. And the last thing we want is people getting in nasty letters from those people that may even make them a little sicker or even stress them out even more. But to come back to the motion at hand, Mr. Speaker, this is one issue that needs to be fixed. The law at the time, and people need to put things in context, was one that was designed to attract business to Cayman, and it did. So to some extent, it did achieve the objective that it was meant to achieve. Where I think we fell down, Mr. Speaker, is in the regulations in terms of who it is that qualifies for what. And I think ultimately that is what it is that we need to fix. But at the end of the day, we still need to let people know that, one, the Cayman Islands is still open for business, and two, I am glad the member from East End didn't call any other companies on the list, because at the same time, we don't want anyone to believe that there are people here that didn't get it, and we want business to still come here. But people need to understand that when they break the rules and abuse the system, this is what will happen to them, is that they will get exposed. And I will encourage the government to get an unredacted copy of this list, take a look at it, and if needs be, revoke those that rightfully did not deserve to get it. I have Googled some of the companies when the lists were presented to me, and I can tell you, you're the cabinet. Well, yeah, there's a declaration there. Yeah, but that's okay. Don't worry, the lawyers will make more money out there defending them anyway. So that's fine. But either way, as I said, an error does not become a mistake until we fail to correct it. The law itself may need some changes, but the regulation is really where it is. And if someone got something on a false pretense, I'm sure reading those immigration form, it does say it's an offense to make a false declaration. We take a look at it, and if needs be, fix it. But in some cases, I can tell you, in this one that started this, the person who applied for the job was a qualified Caymanian that could do the job. And the fact that the company who started it brought a person in under one title, changed their title just to qualify for this, is definitely an abuse of the process. So, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to put that in context, but at the same time, and so just record, I don't remember table this document, but I'm assuming we will take out the company's name on the version that has been tabled. Yeah, well, okay, I just wanted to make sure from that standpoint. Okay, I think probably I will, ultimately ask the member for that. Because like I said, there are legitimate companies on it, and we don't want to send a message out. Yeah, we don't want. Thank you. So, Mr. Speaker, anyway, we just want to say that and just encourage the government. And like I said yesterday, immigration will always be something that's evolving. And as we find the loopholes and we find the errors, we just basically fix them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, they can work this premier to death, I believe, you know. Mr. Speaker, as the member from East End who moved this motion and who spoke to it with his customary eloquence, said, Mr. Speaker, he and I have had a discussion about the mischief that this motion is seeking to address. And the matter that I took issue with the member from East End about is the provision in the motion, in the recital, which declares that, and whereas there are instances of these residency certificates, substantial business presence, having been issued solely on the basis of persons being in a senior management capacity and without any investments in a business due to an anomaly in the wording at the end of Section 37D, subsection 1, subsection A of the Immigration Law 2015 revision, which should read and rather than or. Mr. Speaker, I indicated to the member that I do not believe that there is any anomaly whatsoever. My recollection of this does not tell me that, and Mr. Speaker, indeed, a review of the Hansards from the relevant time in April of 2012, I think, bear out my recollection that the intention was very much to create two categories of persons who would be eligible for a residency certificate on the basis of substantial business presence. One, those who own or propose to own, either directly or indirectly, a minimum of 10% of the shares in an approved category of business in the islands through which he has established or will establish a substantial business presence in the islands. Or B, an individual who proves to the satisfaction of the Chief Immigration Officer that he is or will be employed in a senior management capacity of an approved category of business in the islands. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that the clear intent was to have these two categories of persons eligible, i.e. the investor and the senior manager who had or who has specialist experience and training in an area in which those skills are generally not available locally. I think, Mr. Speaker, before I go back and talk a little bit more about it, I think where this matter has led, or this provision has led to results that we worry about, is the approved category of business provision, which is set out in section 14C 2 of the immigration regulations, not section, regulation. Because the list there of approved categories of business is rather long, including fund administration, brokerage services, investment and fund management services, investment banking, financial trading, including foreign exchange, securities and derivatives, captive insurance or reinsurance management services, reinsurance underwriting, actuarial services, insurance claims management, family office, hedge fund incubation, any business operating within Cayman Brac providing human resource accounting, administrative, IT, or other back office support to businesses in Cayman Brac and elsewhere, and any company registered as an exempted company under Section 164 of the Companies Law 2018 revision. So, Mr. Speaker, if we go back to the genesis of this, when the government of which I was first a part as a member of cabinet took office in 2005, I was assigned responsibility for some aspects of the financial services business. In those days, the financial secretary had principal responsibility for financial services. And one of the things that we had a mandate to do, because we put it in our manifesto, was to create a financial services council, which would be made up of private sector people as well as key government officials who would help to consider what was best in terms of product development and management of the financial services business. And one of the things that came out of that council was a proposal that we look to attract reinsurance business to Cayman. There had been some interest demonstrated principally by the people behind a company that is still here called Greenlight Reinsurance. And they helped put together a a proposal which said, or which provided guidance on what they thought the government should do in terms of policy development and legislative changes to make Cayman a more attractive environment for the reinsurance business, and which would help to lure reinsurance companies here from elsewhere. Now, Mr. Speaker, we started down that road, and then along came the global recession in 2008, and then along came the elections, and we lost the government. And, Mr. Speaker, you took over, and the UDP took over from May 2009. And the FSC continued in one form or the other, and this initiative continued. And the Hansards record that you, who had assumed responsibility for financial services, made first a statement to this House, and then subsequently moved the necessary amendments, and your cabinet created these regulations, which I just read. Now, it is clear to me from reading the Hansard that my recollection is the case, is that there were two categories that were contemplated to be eligible for this 25-year residency certificate. And they were, as I said, those who invested, in other words, who created a substantial business presence in these islands, and the senior people who were thought necessary to make these businesses work. Based on the examples that have been provided by the member from East End when he spoke, I think that we will all conclude that, or all reasonable people will conclude that there are categories of people who have gotten the benefit of these 25-year certificates, which were not within the contemplation of the legislature or the cabinet at the time that this was put into place. And what I can say on behalf of the government is that we are prepared to look at this issue very, very carefully, and particularly the categories of the approved categories of business, to see whether we still think that all of these categories ought to be eligible these approved categories ought to be eligible for this residency, this 25-year residency certificate. I don't believe, though, Mr. Speaker, that we can, at this point, without more, agree with the member from East End in his motion that there is an anomaly in the other provision, that is in section 14C, which sets out the two categories, i.e. the investor and B, the senior management person, and that we should amend the law so that it reads and rather than or with respect to those two categories. What I would ask the indulgence of the member is to accept the government's commitment to review this whole issue and to provide to him and the Parliament a report about what we think we should do to address this issue and the findings that we come to. But certainly, some of the examples that he has been able to provide to the Parliament as a result of his FOI and other investigations do seem to make a prima facie case that the section, or these sections, I think, or the section and the regulations are being used in a way that A, was not contemplated when the legislation was passed, and B, that most of us think amount to an abuse of the system and appear to be working against some of the basic principles of our immigration legislation, which is that where there are qualified and able Caymanians, they should be given first opportunity and a right of refusal with respect to the job opportunities. When we put someone in a position where they have a 25-year residency certificate, we need to be quite certain that overall that is in the best interest of the continued development of the financial services industry and the economy and the Cayman Islands as a whole, but also that they are bringing really, truly specialist skills and or making a substantial financial investment in these islands to warrant that. And where, as the member has demonstrated, it appears that persons are merely CFOs or those kinds of people without anything more, and that some of those jobs could easily be filled by local people, then we really have to look again very carefully at whether or not the legislation is serving the purpose for which it was intended, or whether in fact it is working against the best interest of Cayman and Caymanians. And so that's what, Mr. Speaker, the government is prepared to do. But I should add that the motion is drafted in such specific terms, asking the government to amend a particular section and to remove one word and replace it with another, that I don't think, Mr. Speaker, that we can accept the motion in those terms. If we can somehow reword the resolution to reflect what I've just tried to articulate, then by all means, Mr. Speaker, the government is prepared to make that commitment to review the whole area and the whole issue around this particular point. I hope that's been helpful to the member and the House generally, Mr. Speaker.
Any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll call in the movement to
Speaker?
exercise his right of reply.
Mr. Speaker?
You really want to speak?
Briefly, very briefly.
Be brief then.
Thank you, Mr.
The
Speaker.
member from Newlands.
Mr. Speaker, I just wanted, as a seconder to this motion, to rise to obviously give my support to the motion, but to also thank several people for various reasons. Mr. Speaker, I'd want to thank the member from East End for bringing this issue to the attention of this Honorable House, in particular the Minister and Premier responsible for immigration. And I also wanted to thank the Honorable Premier for listening to the concerns that have been raised and the issues highlighted in the member from East End's debate, and agreeing to take corrective measures. I also feel this would be the appropriate time, Mr. Speaker, to thank another individual, Mr. Hugh Moses. I don't know if the Premier recalls, I'm sorry, but I have to do it. I don't know if the Premier recalls when I was a member of his caucus in 2013, when he came for a meeting with caucus. And I made some not so strong objections to him being in the room, but I made a few comments. But I decided at that time, being a new legislator, Mr. Speaker, and not being used to politics, that I wouldn't make such a fuss. However, the reason why I objected to that individual being connected to the government in any way was that I'd had an experience with him in a prior life. And that was when I was unemployed, Mr. Speaker, for 3 years. And I went to his firm for a job interview. And I interviewed for a job that was actually a position that I used to manage in my prior job, the job before that. And I was put through 6 hours of grueling interviews. Now, Mr. Speaker, at the time I went through that quietly and I tried to fulfill all the requirements and I ended up not getting the position. And, Mr. Speaker, several years after that, when I was honored enough to have been chosen by the people of Borden Down to represent them in this honorable house, I was on the street one day walking and the IT manager who used to work at that firm came up to me and told me that he was instructed by Mr. Moses under no certain circumstances were they to hire me or touch me, have anything to do with me. And he informed me that I had been blacklisted by a number of individuals in this man's circle. Mr. Speaker, I have to thank him because it's for that purpose that I decided, that for that reason, I decided to go into politics. So I'm here today, and when the member from East End started his debate, I said out loud, I knew my day would come. And my day has come. Mr. Speaker, this motion highlights, and I know we won't have time to get to my motion that's on the order paper, Mr. Speaker, but I will, if you will permit me, I will say this is why I wanted to bring that social mobility motion, because this highlights one of the main reasons why our people do not see the benefit of all we're doing for them. This is what affects the social mobility of Caymanians: discrimination, abuse of the privilege to be involved working with the government of this country, doing things in the capacity of being put on boards. This man was on the Labor Appeals Tribunal. And to be conducting his business in this way, Mr. Speaker, is despicable. They will say now that I'm abusing my privilege in this honorable house. They will write all sorts of editorials and articles about me now. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? That is why we're here, to point out these abuses and put a stop to it. This infernal what? Business that we're involved in? Vocation. Mr. Speaker, I had a young lady speak to me the other day. She's a qualified attorney in this country. And she went for a job interview and was told to her face in the interview, you know this is only a work permit renewal, right? And she left. Mr. Speaker, these sorts of people should not be allowed anywhere near our boardrooms, anywhere near our immigration department, and anywhere near our cabinet office. But I really wanted to rise to give my support to this motion. I understand the Premier's reasoning for not being able to make the changes being requested without doing the necessary research and so on. But I can assure individuals who continue to abuse the systems we put in place, and you see the problem is, Mr. Speaker, when we put these things in place, we assume everybody's going to be on the level and not be motivated to abuse what we're putting in place. It seems we're going to have to become a little less trusting going forward. We assume everybody's going to be honest in their dealings, but not everybody's doing that. So I just want to rise as the seconder to this motion to thank everybody for their supports thus far, and I hope we hear from other members of the government if we have time, but I certainly will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? The member for Central Georgetown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try to be very brief. As I've listened to the contributions by all members, including the response by the Honorable Premier, I want to say that I rise to give support to elected member for East End in respect to bringing this motion and to bring into light and to my attention through this honorable House. I must say that I am rather disappointed because one of the names that were mentioned, I know, would call a decent acquaintance. So I'm rather disappointed to hear the claims that have been stated here today. I can't say hand on heart whether they were a failure in respect to the drafting of the legislation or whether they were inappropriate soliciting of the understanding of what the legislation intended to mean, or whether it was a failure by the department and the officer in charge for granting it on understanding of what the intent was. At the end of the day, I think that we've all agreed that this was not the intent based on the evidence presented to this honorable House. But I rise only to highlight, which I didn't unfortunately hear from the Honorable Premier, not that I think he wanted to miss it in any way, but what would be the options available that if we did find that some of these grants of 25-year residency certificate, as I think what I heard him refer to it as, most of us have been referring to it as a work permit, if some of those were contrary or granted contrary to the intent of the legislation, whether or not they will be revoked. Now, I don't want to say that to scare anybody, but we have to acknowledge the seriousness of taking away the opportunity of Caymanians for upward mobility. Even if it's only for one person and that one certificate was granted outside the spirit of things, with those things be considered. And like the elected member from Prospect said to me in passing in the hallway, he said, it looks like we will end on a good note, and I don't want to spoil it. That's not my intention, but I just want to know that we are cognizant or paying attention to if, in fact, some of them have been granted outside the spirit of what it was intended to, that maybe we should consider whether those grants should be revoked and potentially, if necessary, not to lose their skill set, but if the Caymanian is not available, then grant them again, but not at such a length of time of 25 years. Because that's one whole generation of Caymanians coming up, or it could have been that one Caymanian they've been working really hard, hoping to get to the top, but don't realize they will never get there. So I only add that to it, and I thank again the honorable member of East End and the elected member for the deputy opposition leader for bringing this motion and bringing it to my attention, because I must say I wasn't involved in the investigation, but this is exactly proof in the pudding for the public to see that the opposition does do work and does contribute to this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other member wish to speak? The elected member for Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly didn't plan on making a contribution to this discussion, but I want to thank the member from East End for bringing the motion. One of the things that attendance in these Legislative Assembly meetings enables myself, and I would suspect the feeling is mutual amongst the newer members, is that it affords us an opportunity to not only learn about the process of legislative governance, but also enables us to learn how and why certain aspects of laws were put in place in the first place. And given that this legislation that the member from East End in his motion is seeking to amend falls in the area of immigration, of which I have shared responsibility for, it certainly has been a very enlightening discussion thus far. And I think, as the Premier has alluded to, it affords the government an opportunity, perhaps not to take the private member's motion in the exact wording as worded in the motion, but certainly allows us the opportunity to consider how potentially this piece of legislation, this particular section, may be being abused. I acknowledge that it was designed and put in place for a specific reason, to attract a specific type of company that was not domiciled in the Cayman Islands, and by all indications, that purpose has worked. But as we are all firmly aware of the law of unintended consequences, sometimes things that start out one way don't always end that way. And I believe it relates to a point, and I'm glad the member from Bordentown West raised it. And I think this scenario fits in that category. It says that there's nothing wrong with the law, but what is needed is an enforcement of those laws. And I think that is something we would all in this Honorable House agree with, that greater enforcement, first and foremost, is oftentimes needed in the Cayman Islands, and as legislators, we owe it to the people with whom we represent to do just that. So I'm glad to hear that, because, again, these are all things that each of us, I certainly, campaigned on. And as I said yesterday, speaking specifically to the constituents of Prospect, I hope that my participation in these debates serve as further proof that I have and continue to keep my word to them, as was promised during the campaign. I really don't have much more to say as it relates specifically to the private member's motion that is before us, but there were some comments made by the mover of... Absolutely. There were some comments made by the mover of the motion drawing reference to remarks that were made in yesterday's debate when we looked at the Immigration Amendment Bill, specific to what he received from the conversation is that government is looking at the 70%, or at the craft jobs, at the elementary jobs, the cleaner jobs, what he defined, I think, as menial jobs. And specifically, what he referred to this evening in his opening remarks as, and I'm sure he didn't mean it, again, disrespectfully or otherwise, but I just want it stated for clarity, and certainly give him the opportunity to clarify what he meant when he wraps up. But he referred to the vocational trades as bottom feeders. And I don't believe the intent was to suggest that those persons working in technical and vocational trades are any less important than those persons working in managerial, professional, or senior positions. At least I certainly hope not anyway. However, in the context of yesterday's discussion, the member also stated that instead of focusing only on the 70%, we should also focus on the 30%, which reflects problems as the ones being identified here this evening. I think it is important for the member, but more importantly in the context of the discussion, that the listening audience understands the context of my conversation yesterday. The context of my conversation was against the backdrop of addressing the issue of unemployment and the government's strategic goal to reduce unemployment to 0%. Not 4.1%, not 4.9%, but 0%. And therefore, of the 70% of those work permits being issued, they represent jobs that Caymanians who make up that 4.9% of Cayman's present unemployed, that they could occupy. And therefore, that was the reason why I was focusing on that 70% and using it in the context of unemployment. However, with the legislative and administrative changes specific to immigration that this government is simultaneously engaging in, we talked about it yesterday as well, separating labor from the immigration functions, making immigration focus more on border security, and therefore the merger of customs and immigration. Those things are happening simultaneously. But likewise, yesterday I also drew reference to legislation that is likely to come before this House in September of this year, which will address that 30% or the professional managerial category of jobs, which also, in some cases, and certainly as identified in this motion, negatively impact opportunities for Caymanians. The government's vision for addressing holistically all of the labor market with the view of ensuring that Caymanians are not disenfranchised, disadvantaged, or otherwise restricted from accessing the jobs they richly deserve will be made up in part by the efforts of work, which again I am passionate about, I am excited about, because work does represent what I believe to be the solutions that we had yet to hit the mark on, but certainly we will as we draw ever closer to 2019. But legislation that will come before this House in September of this year that will focus on the 30%, those managerial and professional jobs, will come in the form of the Fair Employment Opportunities Commission, which again will create a forum or opportunity for those Caymanians working in professional trades and categories who believe, like I think the member from Georgetown Central just referred to, that perhaps there has been an identified glass ceiling that is restricting upward mobility for our Caymanians, and that too must be viewed as a priority, just as we should be viewing the persons who are unemployed and reasons why they aren't getting access to the job. So I just wanted to state on record that I appreciate and I understand the balance on which the member from East End recommended that we should be looking at this immigration challenge, problem, unemployment, from a standpoint of in its totality. But I trust that he will understand that in yesterday's conversation, the context was that of solving unemployment. And of the 4.9% of persons who are presently unemployed, they represent the persons that we need to do a better job of upskilling and training and giving the vocational opportunities so they can assume one of the 70% of jobs that are presently going to work permit holders. I believe that firmly. But in September, we will simultaneously address the employment challenges of those in professional and managerial positions by the introduction of the Fair Employment Opportunities Commission. So there's a lot of work that is happening simultaneously. I thank the member for his presentation and addressing it, and I hope I have provided the assurance to him that we are looking at the challenge of labor from a holistic standpoint. And lastly, I do trust, and again, I don't believe when he said it, he meant it with the intent in which I took it, but I certainly would encourage him to clarify that point when he does wrap up, and that is, of course, on the remark that the vocational trades somehow equate to bottom feeders, because I don't believe that is what the member believes, and certainly not what I believe, and certainly not what this government believes. We have to give a level of importance and credibility and honor and pride to all work in this country. And whether you're a professional banker or a plumber or a mason does not make you any less of a person. And as we argued yesterday, oftentimes, though we may think otherwise, the average plumber or mason actually makes more money than the entry-level bank teller. So we need to encourage and promote interest in the vocational trades with our young people, but people in general, and certainly words such as bottom feeders in the same sentence as vocational trades is not necessarily the way to go about achieving that. But certainly I thank the member from East End for raising this important issue, for drawing in finer focus once again that it's not a problem in most cases with the law. but it is a problem in a lack of enforcement of that law. I take that on board wholeheartedly and in many respects agree with you completely. And I also thank him for sharing this motion, which allows the government, but in particular those of us who have responsibility for immigration, to perhaps take a closer look to see if a section of the law that was put in place for an established reason that seems to be producing that desired outcome is not in some way being abused by others and therefore being unfair or unequitable to other persons as well, but in particular Caymanians. So I certainly am grateful to the member for East End, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing that brief contribution.
To speak, the Honourable Minister of Financial Services.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make a contribution to this important debate. And, Mr. Speaker, I think as has been ventilated in a very, what I consider to be balanced way, recognizing the importance of the intention of the legislation at the time it was contemplated, at the time it was put into effect, and subsequent results as it relates to the attraction or attracting new business to the jurisdiction. And in particular, Mr. Speaker, if we look at the categories of approved or the approved categories of business in the regulation, you will see that this is aimed primarily at attracting business within the financial services space. And so, Mr. Speaker, I concur with a lot that has been said about the effectiveness to some degree with respect to the legislation in helping to attract businesses such as reinsurance and some of the other listed categories that subsequently or previously did not exist, but now is not only here, but is also growing and is continuing to be focused area and focus areas for growth for the jurisdiction in the financial services space. And, Mr. Speaker, again, I think we all are aware, but for the benefit of the listening public, the fact is that financial services is one of the most, if not the primary driver in our economy. It is a primary contributor to our gross domestic product in that it represents, according to the Office of the Economics and Statistics, as reported in their 2015 analysis, it represents between 52 to 62% of our GDP. And in dollar figures, Mr. Speaker, again, according to the 2015 statistics, our GDP was stated at $2.8 billion, and financial services having contributed between 1.5 and 1.8 billion of that amount. Again, Mr. Speaker, using the 2015 figures, government revenue from financial services was more than 296 million Cayman dollars, or 41% on an annual basis. And again, if we were to add the industry's impact as it relates to customs duties, the figure would be much higher. So, Mr. Speaker, with respect to employment, and I know this is the issues that we have highlighted, the fact that the legislation is in place or was put in place to attract jobs in the economy to ensure that our people are able to have employment opportunities to aspire to. Mr. Speaker, with respect to the financial services industry, again, using the 2015 figures, direct employment in financial services industry accounted for about 16% of total employment In other words, Mr. Speaker, of the 39,138 persons employed in 2015, the financial services industry accounted for the stated 6,623 of these. So again, Mr. Speaker, there is absolutely no doubt of the centrality of the financial services industry to the socioeconomic welfare of the Cayman Islands. And as we discussed earlier, certainly in my statements today, equally there is no doubt that the convergence of international initiatives have placed an increasing pressure upon all jurisdictions, including the Cayman Islands, as it relates to the financial services industry. So, Mr. Speaker, provisions such as these are absolutely essential and critical in helping us to stay competitive in an ever-increasing competitive world. And if I may add, Mr. Speaker, if we look at the essence of what these provisions actually call for, the issue being that of either promoting substantial business presence in the islands, in particular, that in essence, as well as attracting, senior management capacity in the approved category of business, this is in essence the heart of the discussions that are kind of happening when we talk about the significant or sufficient economic presence in our discussions with the European Union. So the fact is, Mr. Speaker, and I have to thank the member from East End for bringing this motion, because he has brought to light provisions in the regulations that I myself was not aware of until today. But actually, it is quite helpful to know that we do have a legislative framework that encourages actual business presence on the ground, boots on ground, buildings, etc. And as I said, in certain industries, we have seen the growth where they didn't exist previously. And this is certainly the push that is being promulgated from various quarters. So I do agree with the position that the government has taken with respect to looking at any areas that may need to be reviewed for effectiveness. We may need to consider, if necessary, ways to ensure that the unintended consequence of a glass ceiling for those aspiring Caymanians who not only have the drive and determination, but have also proven to have gotten the necessary qualification, experience, coupled with the willingness to learn and to rise within their chosen profession. And in these instances, as it relates to financial services in particular, we want to make sure that those opportunities absolutely exist, because we are all concerned about the fact that we want to grow our industries, we want to grow our economy, but we certainly want to ensure that our people benefit from this growth and from this development and from the prosperity that comes therefrom. But, Mr. Speaker, I think, again, I reiterated some of what was discussed previously by myself in this Honourable House, highlighting and emphasizing the importance of financial services, because even though, Mr. Speaker, these provisions are geared, if you're looking specifically under the senior management capacity of an approved category of business, these are aimed at the, as it says, the intention being senior management, and some may argue that a 25-year residency certificate is far too long. But if we look at the reality of wanting to attract top quality expertise, personnel, and even the development of industries that we know not only bring additional dollar figures to our GDP bottom line or government revenue, but as I've highlighted, actually create jobs, real jobs for the local population to actually obtain, thereby creating and enhancing the employment sphere for our people. And I would add, Mr. Speaker, there is obviously and has been, and I recall certainly being in the thick of the discussions about ensuring that we create opportunities where people can afford to live, and hence the discussion about the need to introduce minimum wage, etc. But, Mr. Speaker, I believe it is fair to say, and if I'm not mistaken, my memory serves me correctly, when we were doing the analysis to try to develop the minimum wage exercise, it is fair to say that many of the jobs within the financial services industry at the various levels pay well above the minimum wage. So we're creating jobs where people are better able to sustain themselves and to carry out their familial and other obligations. And those are the kinds of employment opportunities, Mr. Speaker, that we need to be continuing to attract and creating the environment for that type of business to flourish. So certainly, Mr. Speaker, I support and I acknowledge, because having had the benefit of sitting as a previous minister with responsibility for employment and having heard on many, many occasions the situations where there were instances, at least alleged instances, where people felt that they were not given the opportunities which are very real and available, knowing based on the statistics about the employment opportunities that do exist in the financial services sphere. And we heard examples of specific cases that brought this motion to the forefront to begin with. So we know that there are real concerns, and as has been outlined, the work that is taking place, the work that is actually taking place as a continuation of the work that started in the last administration by the PPM-led coalition government at the time, the work of the acronym WORK continues. And we certainly are happy, and I'm certainly happy to see that the progress that has started, or that started, is being carried forward with such vigor and zest as we hear and as we've heard. And so, as a member of this unity government, I'm certainly glad to see that the vision is being brought to fruition, and hopefully some of these concerns, the lingering concerns of whether or not what is sound legislative framework is actually being enforced and carried out in a way that is true to the intention of why the legislation was introduced to begin with. So certainly, Mr. Speaker, that is the contribution that I wanted to make with respect to the importance of having a framework such as this, which seeks to attract the kind of business for us to stay competitive, for us to stay ahead of the game. As you would recall from my statement earlier today in tabling the SEMA report, Cayman is still very much a leader in various aspects of the financial services industry, but we cannot continue to do so if we become complacent about the need to have in our toolbox ways to attract and to create an environment where financial services business continues to flourish. And this is what I see, Mr. Speaker, as being presented in the regulations that we have to date. It is part of the toolbox, the arsenal, as you may see in us being able to attract some of these businesses that didn't exist previously. But of course, the concerns that have been expressed are real with respect to whether or not some of the provisions are being abused or may not being carried out pursuant to the spirit of the law. And that is where we will need to take a closer look at how we can possibly enhance the spirit of the law in actual form. Thank you.
If no other member wishes to speak, I will call on the mover for his right of reply.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I've been known not to fear going where others dread. I am thankful that I brought it, even though it may have been a little offline, but I do know that something needs to be done with this matter. Mr. Speaker, I should give credit where it is due. I thought that my good friend from Town West would have tooted his own horn, but I guess I'll have to do that for him too. Mr. Speaker, he was the one amongst us that brought this to our attention. But the graceful person that he is, most times anyhow, he thought that it would be better if I did the research and brought this to the attention of the government. So it was the member from Town West that did it. I want to thank all those who spoke. Mr. Speaker, I circulated a change to the motion in line with what the government thought was necessary and committed to do. And I'm waiting for the staff of the legislature to complete it in type form, because you did indicate to me that it should be typed, and I suspect that you meant that my handwriting was so bad that no one would be able to read it, which is not too far off. But I would like to address a few things whilst the staff get that to me so that I can send it to your good self and the Premier for approval, agreement. Mr. Speaker, the member from Prospect spoke about my speaking about bottom feeders. I can assure the member from Northside and honorable members and this entire country, there was nothing nefarious about it. Absolutely nothing. For too long, we have in this country thought of our people in vocational positions as bottom feeders. That was the intent. Mr. Speaker, far be it from me to ever say that about vocational people in the vocational fields. I am, and my two sons are. And when they were young, and they said they wanted to be marine engineers, I said to them, if you're going into the vocational disciplines, there are two things you should do. You should consider doing. One, barber, and the other, mechanic. People here will grow and their cars will break down. Or the majority, not so much my good friend from Savannah, but such as, no, I ain't got pick on you today. I was fortunate that one did mechanics. I did in marine engineer, and the other one did in computer. So we're all in that, all of my families. So far be it from me to speak of it in disparaging manner. That's where the money is at. Mr. Speaker, the Premier said that the intent of this was to attract those people with that expertise as well for the development of those categories of businesses. And I do believe, though, that maybe 25 years is stretching it a little bit. Providing, maybe it'll be okay providing there is not an automatic renewal for someone else. Because at some stage, we as a people are going to evolve into that. Mightn't be, like I said, my children are vocational categories, but might be someone else go into that. And I hope we are not going to deprive them of the opportunity to reach the top. Like, certainly if we had given 25-year work permit to somebody in KPMG, a partner there, certainly Roy McTaggart would never have become MD, nor for that matter Dan Scott or one of the Caymanians that were successful in that arena. So without trying to take anything away from the intent of this law, because at the time I thought it was worth exploring to attract these different categories of businesses to the country. And by all intent, I think the Minister for Financial Services did a statement yesterday about, or today, explaining the success of the financial industry over the last year. And the reinsurance is up and coming and going, and there are other categories that are increasing on a daily basis, a yearly basis as well. So we have to make provisions for those because they all trickle down onto other businesses. It trickles down onto the audit business and the legal business and the what have you. So it has a trickle-down effect, whatever we do. And if everybody tries to wrestle from us, so there's nothing wrong with us getting into wrestling match and wrestle from someone else too. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the member from Bardentown West was quite passionate about this, and I understand his passion. I understand how he feels about people encroaching or taking advantage of his people. I understand the experiences that my good friend from Newlands has had. We all have had some experience where we feel that resentment. It builds that resentment amongst us also. I implore the government to carry out this review that we don't know, we may save one person. That's good enough. I noticed the Premier did not say whether or not he was going to review it with a view of revisiting those that had already been issued. And that's fine, but certainly I would expect that. Yeah, I know about the give and take back. We all, as politicians, we know how that is. But certainly someone in the business of providing fuel is not deserving of a 25-year work permit. By no stretch of the imagination. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, I have, and I believe I can do this without I would like to do two things. Withdraw that FOI Appendix E that I laid on the table. Therefore, it cannot be made public. It is no longer made on the table, placed on the table at this stage.
Sorry. Member, what are you proposing to do?
Withdraw the Appendix A from the table, Mr. Speaker, in order that the innocent does not get blamed or tarnished. Mr. Speaker, not to speak. and to the Premier, please. So, Mr. Speaker, the Appendix A is, I request leave to withdraw Appendix A. That it be hidden from the public view.
Yeah, I would just need a copy. I would let you know. I would need a copy of that. Once you sign it, yeah? Carry today.
So, Mr. Speaker, I beg your beg permission from you to withdraw Appendix A, if you so.
Of course, if the House so agrees, and therefore, if the House agrees, and I gather that members in agreement, then it is not a public document at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You're being such a good boy, David. I treat you nice. Signed it? Yeah, they go get it signed and give me a copy. I'll get it back to him.
Mr. Speaker, maybe I can crave your indulgence while he makes the copy of that for yourself. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I therefore move in accordance with provision with Standing Order 25-1 and 25-2. I wish to move the following amendment to private members' motion number 20, 2017/2018. To amend the second resolve as follows. In the second whereas, remove due to an anomaly in the wording at the end of section 37D1A of the Immigration Law 2015 revision, which should read "and" rather than "or," and 2, delete the resolved section and replace it with, "Be it therefore resolved that the government review the Immigration Law 2015 revision with immediate effect to determine if section 37D remains relevant to its original objective of attracting investments and senior management personnel in certain categories of businesses. Be it further resolved that the review is undertaken with a view of updating approved categories of businesses where necessary.
The member has been given permission. Does he intend to speak further to it? The seconder? There needs to be a seconder to it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to second the amendment.
The amendment has been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The motion has been amended. Does the member intend to continue?
Mr. Speaker, merely to say that in the interest of cooperation with the Premier, with the Primer, the Premier, I think it's in the best interest. The objective was to get something done. That's my objective. I need to get something done in order that people stop manipulating this thing, if that's what is happening, or at least something going on, and it needs to be stopped now. Because at least 4 of those on there, but I don't want people to think that there are people, that all those 25 were given in those same circumstances. They were legitimate issuance. It's just that my FOI requested all. Therefore, they're all listed there. I don't want the country to think that this thing is being manipulated by everybody. It is a certain aspects that needs to be addressed. And the government has given its commitment to look at it and with a view of changing whatever is necessary to stop that from happening. Mr. Speaker, I thank you and members.
Will the clerk approach the speaker's chair, please? This is a new resolve now then.
Yes,
That all the way down to it that I gotta read.
yes.
This one goes.
Yes,
This is a new resolve.
yes.
So the question is,
That be therefore resolved and whatever he has.
the second resolve section is to amend, no, that has been done. Honorable members, I desire to have a break so that I can put the get a correct understanding of where the motion is at. I know it has been amended, but now I have to put the correct question to the House. So I'd rather if members could stay in their seats for a minute. And either the Premier or the mover could give me some direction. Be it therefore resolved that the government review the Immigration Law 2015 revision with immediate effect to determine if Section 37D remains relevant to its original objective of attracting investments and senior management personnel in certain categories of businesses. Be it further resolved that the review is undertaken with a view of updating approved categories of businesses where necessary. All in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The motion is therefore passed. Honorable members, it is nigh on to 10 o'clock, and I must say to you that I am struggling with my voice at this point in time and would like your agreement to stop at this point. Is that agreed? Honorable Premier. I've agreed with the Minister of Finance to make one announcement.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, members, it's necessary for us to have a very brief meeting of the Finance Committee to consider two appropriations. And I'm proposing that we will convene Finance Committee on Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. So I just want to make sure all members are aware of it and that you plan to be back here at 10 o'clock on Tuesday so that we can conclude deal with those matters. Thank you very much. Pardon?
No, the honourable member is, the honourable minister has asked to give members information of the Finance Committee to be held on Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. The House will continue tomorrow morning. Well, I'll wait on the Premier, but I don't see any changes. The member from Georgetown Central.
Mr. Speaker, I just rise to give my apologies. Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend as I was given the assurances that during the month of July and August that the House would not be sitting. But I will definitely leave the Honorable Opposition Leader to definitely voice my opinion in respect to anything of concern moving forward. And if he fails in those duties, I know the deputy would be sure to do so. So, in all honesty,
we have your apologies. We understand.
Mr. Speaker, but I just think it's important that I do not think, particularly as a first-time legislator, first-term legislator, that I want the people to think, for whatever reason, that I am not here to do my duties. But unfortunately, I know that this wasn't planned for Tuesday, and I know that the commitments was given that we're not sitting there, but obviously we have to do it because we're squeezing time. But unfortunately, I've already made provisions to not be on island at that particular date. So I just want to make sure that the constituents and my constituency know that I'm not trying to avoid my duties, neither the people of this country. But I will definitely ensure that my responsibilities will be covered.
Normally, all is required is that the member sends his apologies to the presiding officer. That's all that is required. Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I move the adjournment, the comments by the member from Georgetown Central just now reminded me of something he was reported to have said about this meeting being held at this point. The reason why the meeting is held so late in June was to accommodate the Commonwealth Parliamentary Annual Conference, which he helped organize. So that was last week, and that's why we couldn't hold the House last week. So, Mr. Speaker, having given that explanation, I move the adjournment of this honorable House until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.
The question is This Honorable House do now adjourn until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, Friday morning. All those in favor, please say aye. Those against, the ayes have it. This Honorable House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Friday morning next.